Tom had never imagined that his life would change so drastically. After leaving the Marines, he expected to settle into a peaceful, quiet life. But that was before he stumbled upon the advertisement. It was a simple listing, a rundown garage, located in the middle of nowhere, for sale at a price that seemed far too good to be true. The description was vague. Abandoned alien garage, sold as is, no questions asked. It piqued his curiosity, and after a quick search, he found that the place had been sitting empty for years. His instincts, honed over years of military service, told him to walk away. But then again, the thrill of the unknown had always been a part of him. What if the garage contained something valuable? Something more than just an old building collecting dust? What if it held the kind of mystery he couldn't resist? His gut urged him to take the risk. He had always been a man who sought adventure. And maybe this was the one thing that could break him out of his mundane routine. The drive to the garage was longer than expected, taking him down winding roads and through dense woods that seemed to close in around him. The closer he got, the more he began to question his decision. Why would an alien garage be in such an isolated location? Who would store alien tech in a place so ordinary? It didn't make sense. The logical part of his mind told him that it was probably a scam, some local joke. But there was another part of him, one that remembered the strange things he'd witnessed during his time in the military, that couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this place. When he arrived, he was greeted by an eerie silence. The garage was surrounded by high rusted fences, barely visible through the overgrown grass and weeds. The structure itself looked like it had been neglected for decades. Cracked walls, broken windows, and a roof that sagged under the weight of time. But there was something about the place that seemed off. It wasn't just abandoned. It felt like it had been left in a hurry, as if someone had walked away without looking back. Tom parked his truck outside and stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of oil. As he approached the building, he noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols that seemed almost alien in nature. His fingers traced the grooves in the stone, wondering who had carved them. Were they part of the original construction, or had they been added later? He walked inside, his boots echoing in the emptiness. The interior was just as rundown as the outside, with tools scattered about, some of them covered in rust, others seemingly untouched. But it wasn't the tools that caught his attention. It was the strange equipment piled in the far corner. Some of it looked like ordinary machinery, things he might expect to see in any mechanic's shop. But then there were items that seemed completely out of place. Odd metal components, twisted and bent in ways that defied logic. He squinted at one particularly large object in the corner. It resembled something like a futuristic vehicle, but it was unlike anything he had ever seen. Tom's heart raced as he moved closer. This wasn't just a garage. This was something far more sinister. The machines in here weren't just broken or outdated. They looked like they were from a different world altogether. His hand hovered over the surface of one of the items. As he touched it, a strange hum resonated through the air, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something was definitely wrong. This wasn't just a collection of old junk. This was a treasure trove of alien technology. But why had it been left here? Who had built this garage? And more importantly, who had abandoned it? He took a deep breath and decided to investigate further. The garage seemed far too strange to be left without any explanation. He moved toward a desk at the far end of the room, where he saw a stack of old, weathered papers. Service records. Tom had always been a mechanic, even during his time in the Marines. He had spent countless hours maintaining military vehicles, so the idea of looking through some old service logs didn't seem unusual. He picked them up and began to flip through the pages. Most of them were written in a language he couldn't understand, filled with strange symbols and phrases. But a few of the logs seemed familiar, even though they were decades old. They described the maintenance of a vehicle that was clearly not from Earth. It wasn't just an alien vehicle, it was an alien craft, something far more advanced than anything humanity had ever created. The more he read, the more questions began to form in his mind. These records weren't just about fixing broken engines. They spoke about things that seemed impossible: advanced propulsion systems, energy sources far beyond anything known to man, and even references to technologies that defied the laws of physics. The more he read, the more his doubt turned to disbelief. But just as he was about to put the papers down, one final entry caught his attention. It was different from the others. It was a short note written in a different handwriting, almost hurried, as if the person who wrote it had been in a panic. "This place is no longer safe. The technology is unstable. Do not let anyone discover what we've hidden here. The consequences will be catastrophic." Tom's stomach tightened. What had he stumbled upon? The garage, the strange markings, the alien tech. It was all starting to add up. But nothing made sense. He had come here expecting to find some junk, maybe an interesting project to work on. But now he was standing in the middle of something that had the potential to change everything. Suddenly, the sound of something shifting in the corner made him freeze. Was he alone? He slowly turned, his breath catching in his throat. The shadows seemed to move, and in that moment, Tom realized the gravity of the situation. He wasn't just in an abandoned garage. He was standing on the edge of a mystery that could alter the course of humanity forever. And it seemed that whatever he had discovered, he wasn't supposed to know. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every little noise in the garage, each creak of the wooden beams, each scuffle of dust, seemed amplified in the eerie silence. The air around him felt thick, like it was charged with an energy he couldn't explain. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled as he slowly turned, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. Nothing. It was the kind of silence that made his instincts go into overdrive. Something was wrong. He decided to leave the papers on the desk for now and get a better look at the rest of the garage. As he walked through the cluttered space, his mind raced. The warning in that final service log echoed in his mind. The technology is unstable. Do not let anyone discover what we've hidden here. Had someone tried to destroy the alien tech? Had the previous owners left in a hurry? Tom had never been one to back down from a challenge. But this felt different. This felt like it could be more than just an abandoned project. Something about the whole place made his skin crawl, but his curiosity pulled him deeper into the mystery. He moved toward the large, strange vehicle at the far corner of the garage. He had initially assumed it was just a leftover machine, an old, abandoned model. But now, with everything he had discovered, he wasn't so sure. This was no ordinary vehicle. Its shape was sleek, aerodynamic, unlike anything he had seen in all his years of working on military and civilian machinery. The craft looked almost alive, as if it had a pulse, a heartbeat. The closer he got, the more he could feel the hum, a vibration deep in his chest. He placed a hand on the cold, metallic surface. His fingers tingled, as if the vehicle was somehow interacting with him, responding to his touch. His mind raced. What was this thing? He stepped back and reached for the stack of service records. Maybe there was more he could learn. His hand shook slightly as he flipped through the pages again, but this time he found something new. There was a detailed schematic of the alien craft, a diagram that described its power core, a glowing, unstable energy source capable of fueling the entire planet, or destroying it. Suddenly, Tom stopped reading. A sense of dread washed over him. What had he gotten himself into? The more he learned, the more he realized this wasn't just a piece of alien tech. It was something that could change the course of history. And that wasn't even the worst part. The schematics seemed to suggest that the power core wasn't meant for peaceful purposes. In fact, the design appeared to be a weapon capable of wiping out entire populations with one strike. For the first time since he'd entered the garage, Tom felt fear. The consequences of activating such technology, of tampering with something so advanced, were unimaginable. But how much more was hidden within this garage? What other secrets had the previous owners left behind? A sudden sound broke his concentration, a soft tapping from somewhere behind him. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, more insistent. He turned toward the source of the noise, his heart racing. Was it just the wind? Or was something else here with him? The tapping turned into a rhythmic pattern, almost like footsteps. Slowly, he made his way toward the back of the garage, toward the source of the noise. The shadows seemed to stretch out before him, the darkness growing deeper with every step. His pulse quickened as he rounded the corner, expecting to find something. But there was nothing, only darkness. He stood frozen for a moment, trying to shake the feeling that something was out of place. Was he imagining things? But then, out of the corner of his eye, something moved. His head snapped toward it. A figure. In the shadows, a tall figure emerged, dark, motionless. The air grew colder, and the hairs on Tom's neck stood straight up. Tom instinctively reached for the pistol holstered at his side, a habit from his military days. But before he could even draw it, the figure stepped forward. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed in the garage, and Tom could feel the temperature drop even further. The figure, tall and thin, was wearing a dark, reflective suit. It was unlike any uniform he had ever seen, but there was no mistaking it. This wasn't a human. "You shouldn't be here." The voice came out low, almost mechanical, with a chilling tone that sent a shiver down his spine. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He didn't recognize the language at first, but he could sense that this wasn't an ordinary person. This was someone, or something, he had no business confronting. Before Tom could react, the figure stepped closer, its face hidden behind a featureless mask. "Leave now." The voice seemed to reverberate, not just in the air, but inside his mind. Tom's grip tightened on the gun, but his instincts told him to hold off. There was something off about this creature, something he couldn't quite place. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows, vanishing without a trace. Tom stood there, in the darkness, his heart racing in his chest. What was happening? Was it a warning? Or something more? The tapping had stopped. The garage had returned to its quiet, eerie silence. But Tom knew one thing for sure. He was not alone. As the silence settled in once more, he realized he had uncovered more than just alien technology. He had stumbled into something far bigger, something that was beyond his understanding. The figures that had been in this place before were not gone. They were still here, watching, waiting. Tom knew he had to leave, but he couldn't bring himself to walk away just yet. He had already crossed the line, and now there was no turning back. Whatever was hidden in this garage, whatever secrets it held, was far from finished. And the war, whatever war had been started, was just beginning. As he turned to leave, he felt the weight of those mysterious eyes still on him, following his every step. He wasn't sure if he was the hunter or the hunted. All he knew was that time was running out. Tom stood frozen, his mind racing. The figure had disappeared without a trace, but its words, their power, echoed in his head. "You shouldn't be here." It wasn't a warning. It was a command. Something deep within him told him that his presence here had disturbed something, some ancient force that was never meant to be uncovered. The silence around him was deafening, pressing down on his chest like the weight of 1,000 secrets. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to turn around and walk out of the garage and never look back. But the mystery tugged at him. He couldn't just walk away from this. He had seen something, felt something, that he could never ignore. His curiosity had always driven him forward, even in the face of danger. And this was no different. With a deep breath, he made his decision. He wasn't leaving just yet. Something was hidden here, something that the world wasn't meant to know. And Tom wasn't about to walk away without answers. He moved slowly, cautiously, his boots creaking on the worn floorboards as he returned to the alien craft in the corner. As he approached it once again, the hum of the ship seemed to grow louder, vibrating in the air around him. The strange sensation that the ship was alive never left him, and as he placed his hand on the cold metal, it almost felt like the ship was reacting to his presence. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he looked up at the glowing control panel in the cockpit of the craft. There were markings all over it, strange symbols he didn't recognize, but he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, deep inside, he understood them. His military training kicked in as he studied the panel. There had to be a way to turn it on, to figure out what it did. With a hesitant hand, he reached toward a series of buttons that glowed faintly. His fingers hovered over them, not sure which one to press. If he activated this thing, would it be the key to understanding everything, or would it be his undoing? The warnings flashed through his mind, the alien figure's words still fresh in his ears. Leave now. But Tom didn't leave. He pressed a button. The moment his finger made contact, the entire room seemed to shift. The garage, once quiet and dark, came alive with a soft, whirring sound, as if the machinery inside the ship had just woken from a long slumber. The walls seemed to vibrate, and the lights overhead flickered before settling into a cold, unnatural glow. The ship's cockpit began to hum louder, and Tom felt a strange pull, a magnetic force drawing him in. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shook violently, and Tom stumbled backward, barely catching himself on one of the metal beams. His heart raced. What had he just done? As the tremors subsided, Tom's eyes darted to the corner of the room. There, at the back of the garage, a hidden panel had slid open, revealing something that had been concealed for years. A strange, metallic doorway stood before him, glowing with the same eerie light that now filled the garage. It wasn't a normal door. It looked more like a portal, shimmering with an energy he couldn't explain. Without thinking, Tom moved toward the doorway, his legs shaking with adrenaline. What was on the other side? He didn't know, but he had to know. His mind screamed at him to stop, to turn around and get out, but his curiosity drowned out the voice of caution. He stepped through the glowing portal. For a moment, everything around him seemed to blur, like he had stepped into another dimension. The familiar sights of the garage faded, replaced by a landscape unlike any he had ever seen. The ground beneath his feet was a strange, iridescent substance that pulsed with a soft, blue glow. In the distance, towering structures, alien in design, yet awe-inspiring, rose up against a sky that shimmered with colors Tom couldn't even name. He stumbled forward, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Where was he? And more importantly, how had he gotten here? Tom's breath caught in his throat as he noticed something else. In the sky above him, hundreds, no, thousands, of lights began to move. Small metallic ships darted through the air, glowing with the same unnatural light that filled the garage. They moved in formation like a swarm, with perfect precision. The shapes of the ships were not like anything he had ever seen. They were sleek, otherworldly, and yet somehow familiar. Had he just stumbled into an alien world? Tom's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just an abandoned garage. This was a gateway, a doorway to another world. He took a hesitant step forward, his boots crunching on the glowing ground. The hum of the alien ships above filled the air, and Tom could hear something else now. A low, rumbling sound like distant thunder. The rumble grew louder and louder, until it felt as though the entire world was shaking. And then he saw it. A massive, imposing figure appeared in the distance, walking toward him with purpose. It was unlike anything Tom had ever seen. A towering, armored creature, its movements precise and deliberate. It was humanoid, but its features were obscured by a metallic helmet and armor that gleamed under the light of the ships. The figure didn't stop, didn't hesitate. It moved with an unsettling speed toward Tom. His pulse quickened. Was this another alien? Was this the one who had spoken to him earlier in the garage? As the figure approached, Tom's instincts screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. He stood frozen, eyes locked on the figure as it drew nearer. The ground beneath him seemed to hum, vibrating with power. When the figure finally stopped just a few feet in front of him, it didn't speak immediately. Instead, it reached down and removed its helmet. Tom gasped. What he saw was not what he expected. The creature's face was not human. It wasn't even clothes. But there was a strange familiarity to it. The skin was dark, almost metallic, with glowing lines that pulsed like circuits. Its eyes were not eyes at all, but deep, endless pools of light, shifting colors, constantly changing, as though they held the knowledge of an entire galaxy. The figure stood still for a long moment, studying Tom. Finally, it spoke in that same low voice that resonated in Tom's mind. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." Tom's blood ran cold. The weight of those words hung in the air, and for the first time, Tom realized just how deep he was in this mystery. This wasn't just a garage or an alien artifact. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something far beyond what he had ever imagined. And it was clear now. He wasn't meant to be here. And whatever had been unleashed, it was just the beginning. The air around Tom felt heavy, charged with a palpable sense of danger. He stood motionless in front of the towering alien figure, his heart racing in his chest, the hum of the otherworldly ships echoing above. He didn't know what he had stumbled into, but the creature before him seemed to be the key to everything. The creature's eyes, those swirling, shifting pools of light, seemed to penetrate his very soul. Tom could feel the weight of its gaze, as though it was assessing every thought, every action, every hesitation. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. His mind raced to make sense of the situation. How had he gotten here? What had he triggered? And most importantly, what did this alien want with him? The creature stepped closer, its movements precise and calculated. There was a coldness in the air that seemed to follow it, a chill that made the hairs on the back of Tom's neck stand up. Its voice, when it finally spoke, was deep and resonant, but there was a strange, almost mechanical quality to it, as if it wasn't entirely alive or wasn't entirely dead. "You were never meant to find this place." The words echoed in Tom's mind before he could even process them. It was as if the alien was speaking directly into his thoughts. "But now that you have, the war you've triggered is inevitable." Tom's head spun. War? What kind of war was this alien talking about? His mind struggled to grasp the meaning behind its words, but before he could voice his questions, the creature raised a long, clawed hand and pointed toward the horizon. In the distance, through the haze of the alien landscape, a massive fleet of ships appeared, gliding silently across the sky. They were far larger than the smaller crafts Tom had seen earlier, their dark, jagged shapes blotting out the shimmering sky. There were hundreds, no, thousands, of them stretching across the sky like an impending storm. Tom felt the ground beneath him tremble as the fleet advanced. The ships didn't make a sound. There was no roar of engines, no blast of energy. They were coming for something. "This is the force you've awakened, human." The creature's voice was cold, impassive. "The war that is about to unfold is beyond your comprehension. You cannot stop it." Tom felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The fleet of ships was approaching at an alarming speed, their dark forms now clearly visible against the sky. The sheer scale of what he was witnessing felt overwhelming, beyond anything he had ever imagined. Who were these aliens, and why had they been hidden away in this place? As the fleet moved closer, the alien's voice rang out again, this time tinged with a hint of finality. "The war will begin. You are the catalyst." Tom could hardly breathe as he watched the ships descend. They were so precise, so methodical, as if they had been waiting for something, or someone, to trigger this moment. The sky above him began to darken, the once shimmering colors turning to a deep, ominous red, the air thickening with a pressure that made Tom's chest tighten. His mind raced, but it wasn't the alien's words that frightened him most now. It was the unseen presence of something far larger than this first wave of ships, something far more powerful, lurking just beyond his sight. The alien creature before him tilted its head, as though sensing his thoughts. "You feel it too," it said in that same haunting, metallic voice. "There is more. You will see." Without warning, the alien extended its clawed hand toward Tom, and before he could react, the ground beneath him buckled. He stumbled, almost falling, as a deep rumble vibrated through the air. The alien raised its hand further, and the entire landscape seemed to warp and twist. Tom gasped in horror as the world around him began to change, shifting in an instant from the alien landscape to something much darker, much more sinister. He found himself standing in a completely different place. The sky above was filled with flashes of bright, jagged lightning, and the landscape around him was barren, decimated. The ground was cracked, the sky thick with clouds of smoke and dust. It looked like a war zone, but not a war zone from Earth. This was something else, something far beyond the scope of his experience. Tom stumbled back, feeling the cold touch of dread creep up his spine. The alien's voice came again, this time more like a warning. "This is where the war has already been fought, the battles you cannot fathom. This was the result of the war your people will soon experience." The creature's glowing eyes narrowed as it spoke. "You have already crossed a line that can never be undone." Suddenly, the ground beneath him quaked again. The sound of engines, heavy, mechanical, monstrous, echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Tom turned toward the noise, his heart pounding in his chest. What was coming? From the horizon, an enormous shadow appeared. At first, it was hard to distinguish its shape, but as it drew closer, Tom realized with a jolt of fear that it was massive. A dark, mechanical colossus, far larger than any ship he had ever seen. It had countless weapon ports along its sides, and a terrifying, eerie glow emanated from its core. The alien creature's voice once again pierced the air. "This is what you've awoken, human. The War Lord, the harbinger of destruction. It comes for everything." Tom's breath caught in his throat as the monstrous ship loomed closer. It moved with a slow, deliberate pace, as if it were a god come to claim its due. And behind it, countless other ships followed, an army of unimaginable scale. The true power of this alien war fleet was now fully revealed. Tom's heart pounded in his chest. He had unknowingly triggered something far greater than he could have ever understood. The words of the alien echoed in his mind once more. "You are the catalyst." The terror that gripped him was almost suffocating. What had he done? What could he do now? The alien before him seemed to read his thoughts. "You cannot stop them. Not alone. You must learn, human. You must fight or face annihilation." Tom turned back toward the looming army, his fists clenched in frustration. The war that was about to begin had already begun for them, and he was at the center of it all. Tom's mind was racing. The alien ships, massive and menacing, were approaching at a speed that left no room for hesitation. The ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble with the power of their engines, the entire air thick with the promise of destruction. The towering figure before him, the one who had spoken of a war he couldn't comprehend, stood unwavering, its glowing eyes still locked on him. It felt as though the entire universe had conspired to place him here, at this moment, on this alien world. He wanted to turn back. He wanted to escape and forget everything he had seen, everything he had unknowingly triggered. But there was no going back now. The war, as the alien had said, was already underway, and it would only escalate from here. The fleet of ships that hovered above him weren't the only threat. Something far worse was on the horizon, something more dangerous than Tom could ever imagine, and he was the one who had set it in motion. The alien raised a hand, its claw-like fingers moving with unnatural precision. "You have already done what no one else could. You have unlocked the gate to this war." The words, though cold, carried an unsettling tone of admiration. It was as if it respected Tom's bravery, or perhaps his foolishness, for daring to disturb the ancient peace that had kept this conflict hidden for so long. Tom's heart pounded in his chest. What could he do now? He had no answers, no plan. But there was one thing he knew for certain. He could not let these invaders take over Earth. He had to find a way to fight back. The alien creature seemed to sense his thoughts. It stepped closer, its dark, metallic face looming over Tom. "You will learn. You must learn to fight if you wish to survive." As if on cue, the ground beneath them cracked, and from the jagged fissures, a series of figures emerged. They weren't human. They weren't even clothes. They were massive armored creatures, humanoid in shape, but covered in thick, scaly plating that shimmered with an unnatural light. Their eyes burned with intensity, glowing with a fierce hatred. Tom instinctively reached for the gun at his side, but his fingers closed on nothing. He had no weapons, no defenses. These creatures, these soldiers, were unlike anything he had ever encountered. How could he possibly fight them? The alien seemed to read his fear. It chuckled darkly, the sound echoing in Tom's mind. "You are not alone, human. You have resources. You have allies. But they are far away. You will have to reach them, and you will have to fight to survive." Tom didn't understand. He didn't know who these allies were, or where they were. But the alien didn't seem to care about his confusion. It pointed again toward the horizon, where the massive fleet was now descending rapidly. "The warlord approaches. It is only a matter of time before it reaches you. It will bring destruction like you cannot imagine. But you have the power to stop it." Tom's heart sank. The warlord, the name alone made it sound unstoppable. And yet, something deep inside Tom stirred. The alien had said he could stop it. He didn't know how. He didn't know where to start. But somehow, he felt that the key to stopping this invasion lay in the garage back on Earth, the garage that had been the gateway to this alien world. If he could just understand what was hidden there, the old service records that the previous owner had left behind, maybe, just maybe, he could unlock the knowledge to defeat these invaders. The alien seemed to sense the shift in Tom's thoughts. "Go back to where it all began. You will find what you need there. But hurry. Time is running out." Before Tom could ask another question, the world around him began to distort again, the portal opening once more. The alien creature stepped back, its glowing eyes flickering with what could only be described as regret, or perhaps resignation. "Go now, human. You have only a few hours. When the warlord arrives, it will be too late." Tom didn't hesitate. He stepped toward the portal, the swirling lights around him pulling him back to Earth. As the landscape around him shifted once more, he felt the overwhelming weight of the situation. This was it. He had no choice but to act. Time was ticking. Back in the rundown garage, the hum of the alien ship still lingered in the air, but there was a strange sense of urgency now. The garage, once a forgotten relic of a time long past, had transformed into something far more significant. It was a key, a gateway to a conflict that would soon consume everything, unless Tom could figure out what to do next. The old service records sat on the desk, waiting for him. As Tom approached them, his heart raced. This was where it all began. These records held the answers he so desperately needed. He flipped through the papers, his hands trembling as he examined each one. There were notes about the garage's previous owner, a name he didn't recognize. But there was something else, a list of coordinates, a series of dates, a detailed account of a long-forgotten war. The pieces started to come together in Tom's mind. This wasn't just some random garage. This was the staging ground for something much larger. The war had been fought in secret, hidden away from the public eye, but it had never truly ended. The fleet he had seen was only a part of the conflict that had raged across the universe for centuries, and now Earth was the final battleground. His eyes landed on the final entry in the records, a single line of text that made his blood run cold. "The warlord is returning. The time is now." Tom's heart pounded as he realized the full gravity of the situation. This was it. The war had come to Earth, and it was up to him to stop it. With a final glance at the records, Tom closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. There was no time to waste. He had to find allies. He had to fight. He had no idea how he was going to do it. But he knew one thing. He couldn't let this war destroy everything. Not now. Not after everything he had uncovered. Tom grabbed his gear, checked his weapons, and prepared to face what was coming. The warlord was on its way, and it was only a matter of hours before everything would change forever. The clock was ticking.